A leaked UN report claims North Korea and Iran are exchanging illicit missile technology using China as a transit hub. How worrying are these breaches? Should the world seek stricter safeguards? And what sort of lesson is this to countries seeking nuclear power as a bargaining tool? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. On Saturday, a leaked UN report claimed that North Korea and Iran have been regularly exchanging ballistic missile technology through a neighbouring third country named by diplomats as China. The report was submitted to the Security Council by a UN panel of experts on Friday. That panel monitors compliance with UN sanctions imposed on Pyongyang after it conducted 2 nuclear tests in 2006 and 2009. The sanctions include a ban on all trade in nuclear and missile technology with North Korea, as well as an arms embargo. Iran has also been under 4 rounds of UN Security Council sanctions in relation to its nuclear program. The panel says that this situation presents new challenges to the international non-proliferation efforts. Several Security Council diplomats say China was unhappy about the report and might not agree to release it to the public. In the past, Beijing has presented the publication of expert panel reports on North Korea and Sudan. Now, in May last year, UN experts announced North Korea had used front companies to sell weapons and provide illegal assistance to Myanmar, Iran and Syria. Other reports highlighted North Korea's military cooperation with other Middle Eastern countries, including Egypt, Iraq, Yemen, Libya and Sudan. A US research center says North Korea's cooperation with Iran goes back to 1985, when Tehran agreed to finance the development of Scud missiles in exchange for Scud-B technology. 2 years later, Iran and North Korea signed a $500 million arms deal, including the purchase of 100 Scud-Bs by Tehran. In October 1997, 2 North Korean defectors claimed that North Korea primarily exports missiles to Iran, Syria, Egypt and Libya. In May 2003, another North Korean expert testified before a US Senate Governmental Affairs Subcommittee that he helped to test fire a missile in Iran during the summer of 1989. In May 2010, a leaked UN report said North Korea had circumvented UN sanctions and exported nuclear and missile technology to Syria, Myanmar and Iran. Well, joining us now to discuss this issue are our guests in Aberdeen, James Wylie. He's the director of the Strategic Studies Programme at the University of Aberdeen and was formerly a research officer at the British Ministry of Defence. In Oslo, Bjornar Simonsen, an international counsellor for the Korean Friendship Association. That's a group working closely with the North Korean government's Committee for Cultural Relations. And in Brussels, Joshua Goodman, a programme director at the Transatlantic Institute. Welcome, gentlemen, to the programme. James, let's start off with you. We know that Iran and North Korea have been working together for a while now, but how worrying is this report detailing the swap of missile technology?
Well, as you said, there's been a long history there to North Korean Iranian cooperation over illicit nuclear material, going way back over 20 years. In a sense, there's nothing new about this. What is alarming, though, is that all the various sanctions imposed on North Korea and on Iran are still not stopping this. And what's causing further alarm, if it's accurate, is that China, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is actually assisting in this. Now, there's good reasons why China could possibly be assisting in this. The primary good reason for China is, of course, energy, in that China is hugely oil deficient, it's hugely energy deficient, its continuing economic growth, and indeed its miracle of economic growth, it requires continued access to energy. And of course, Iran has an ace card to play there regarding China. Also, of course, China wishes to keep the North Korean regime fairly stable. It wants to allow it to export about the only thing it can export, which is arms. Its GDP is about $20 billion. It's reckoned that arms sales probably account for at least 10% of its minuscule GDP. And the last thing that China actually wants, even though it may have reservations about the North Korean regime, is to have that regime collapse. It would cause all kinds of problems for
Certainly
China.
a dangerous game,
So,
whatever it's playing, isn't it? Joshua, do you agree? I mean, are you equally alarmed?
Yes, I agree. We should be equally alarmed. I think James highlights the exact reasons. China is the main factor here. They have allowed weapons to, or nuclear technologies to pass through their territory. If we look back at the Syrian nuclear program, it was evident after the attack, which uncovered the nuclear program to the public. It was evident that North Korea was facilitating in the development of Syria's nuclear program, and that the materials were traveling through China into Europe and into Syria itself. And that's a significant issue.
Is this all a balanced play to try and offset the power of the US?
I don't think it's a balanced play to offset the power of the U.S. I think it's because it serves their own strategic interests at this point. They're more interested in ensuring that their needs, as James outlined, are taken care of, are secured, and that's what the main focus for them. It's not to get back at the United States, I don't think.
Okay, Bjornar, you know the government, you know the way it works in North Korea. What do you think is behind this report? Any truth in it?
No, and this is not the first report we see that attacks North Korea. We believe this report is totally an attack against DPRK, and it has very little grounds. From what we see in the news, it has been reported that that they were somehow transporting illicit parts through Air Koryo, the international airline, which is to me totally ridiculous, and also the diplomats
Isn't that the best place
that
to
were quoted.
Transport it from and to?
Not an airline to an international airport. I mean, everyone can show up with their handycam and make a movie about everything that's coming out of the airplane, and this is going to be scanned in the X-ray in the Chinese customs. This is true also.
But surely if North Korea was behind this,
were...
then they would be turning a blind eye and looking the other way, wouldn't it?
I should say that there is no evidence so far that this report is referring to. All I've seen is allegations and speculation.
Okay, James, Bjornar has made a good point there. The fact that this was transported through the airlines, I mean, quite extraordinary, isn't it? If these two countries, Iran and North Korea, were initially thought of as being part of Bush's axis of evil, and yet this ballistic missiles technology was easily transported.
Well, some of it may have been via airlines disguised as goodness knows what other kinds of material. But of course, it's on the record that, for example, North Korea does transport a lot of its military sales by ship, for example, around the world. It's not so long since one of their ships were interdicted on their way to Yemen, carrying arms. Which then, as the Yemenis explained to the Americans, it was for Yemeni self-defence, and at that time the US was inclined to allow the arms to be delivered. Can I just say, on the question of whether China wants to upset the Americans, then it is actually a long-standing part of Chinese policy to show the world that the Americans cannot always have things their own way. That's not to say that on every issue China will oppose the US, because of course it has a hugely important trading relationship there. But occasionally it likes, for reasons of its own prestige, to demonstrate it isn't always going to go along with everything the American wants. And it did this, for example, over sanctions on Iran, over Iran's nuclear activities. The Chinese have been very reluctant to impose meaningful sanctions on the Iranians.
Joshua, let's pick up on the point that James made about the transportation via ship, though, from North Korea and to wherever else it wants to send its ballistic missiles to, its ballistic weapons to. The South Koreans have signed the Proliferation Security Initiative. This will allow for searches of suspect North Korean ships at sea. Surely this is creating a further rift in their relationship.
Well, I'm sure it is creating a rift in the relationship, but it's done out of necessity because North Korea does transport materials that are banned through shipping lines, and the same can be said for Iran, and that's the reason why Iran's national shipping line is sanctioned under the United Nations Security Council. That adds merit to or credence to the theory that they may be transporting weapons and other technologies through commercial airliners. In the case of Iran Air, it has evaded sanctions to this point, but now with the recent revelation, should the report be released and we see the evidence, it could bring pressure for sanctions to target the airlines themselves, as they've become reportedly a mode of transportation for this illicit or illegal actions.
Bjornar, if there are sanctions against the airlines, what sort of impact will this have on North Korea and North Koreans themselves?
Well, this report doesn't accomplish anything else than to create further hostility towards North Korea. As has been said, there are already UN resolutions in place, in fact 3 resolutions that cover any aspect that you might argue for as far as public security, because the public want to have to know that they are secure. But the only way that the public can be secure about these things are verification. And indeed, North Korea has offered the United States full inspection and verification. But because of the United States hostile policy, these negotiations have always failed.
You say that the public there wants to know that it is secure. Surely the public in North Korea would rather have food, infrastructure, instead of all that money being wasted on nuclear technology?
Nobody's hiding the fact that during the mid-90s, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and also the problems of flooding, there has been a food shortage. But after 2003, the situation has improved rapidly. And in 2006, it is expected
from... You're not desperate for aid? I mean, aid has always been the carrot in negotiations with North Korea.
Well, not always. We must remember that at some point in history, North Korea has been better off than South Korea.
We're talking about now, though.
Yes, but as I'm saying, the situation in the food situation has improved rapidly since 2003.
Okay, James, what role now for China? I mean, we know that China is trying to stop this report from being released. It's going to cause a lot of problems for China, isn't it? Or will it carry on as before?
Well, I think China will just probably carry on as before. One feature of Chinese high foreign policy over the past 18 months or so has been actually its robustness. Its lack of concern, or too much concern, over what much of the rest of the world thinks of, for example, its human rights. Being very robust in its economic policy, and being very robust in its power projection to other parts of the world, often to support rather unsavoury regimes, such as in many parts of Africa, where it's getting access to natural resources in return for its support. So my guess is that China may suffer mild embarrassment. Doesn't like anything that besmirches its good name, but having said that, it's not going to roll over in the face of pressure from the US and the rest of the West. Can I just say, though, regarding North Korea's exports of illicit material, one of the easiest things, one of the most valuable things that North Korea can export is, of course, knowledge. It can send personnel to Syria, personnel to Iran and other places, and often that's just as important as actual hard material.
Okay, well, that doesn't seem to be happening at the moment, and this has raised a lot of concern in the US. Earlier this year, the US Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, warned that North Korea's development of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles pose a direct threat to the United States. Gates said, with the North Koreans' continuing development of nuclear weapons and their development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, North Korea is becoming a direct threat to the United States, and we have to take that into account. Joshua, North Korea has been testing the world for years and years and years now. Isn't it perhaps time now for the world to test North Korea's intimidating rhetoric by pushing back?
I think that's what the reaction will be. Is there's going to be a discussion about stronger sanctions against North Korea, about increasing the pressure to try to force the regime into negotiations, six-party talks again, and trying to resolve this issue. Because, as you said, whenever the West eases up, North Korea then takes advantage of it, and they've been testing them continuously. And as is the case with Iran as well, regimes like Iran, regimes like North Korea, when it comes to the nuclear programs, will continue to test and test and test until they're pushed back. Unless they see a strong reaction from the West, neither side will deter in their behavior.
Bjornar, what makes North Korea so bellicose here? I mean, is it the confidence knowing that the US has tiptoed around this issue?
First of all the activities of North Korea surrounding missile and nuclear weapons are for self-defense only. And the reaction of North Korea is because North Korea doesn't want to be pushed around.
Who does it need these nuclear weapons for? I mean, who's going to attack North Korea? What's the worry there?
Well, you have to remember North Korea is technically still in war with the United States, and it is the United States that consistently has refused to sign a peace treaty ending the armistice of 1953. And the United States constantly make threats of invasion and carries exercises close to its borders, sometimes resulting in incidents.
Do you think Pyongyang is concerned about China's dominance in the area?
North Korea doesn't have any allies. It's a member of the non-aligned movement, and North Korea doesn't comment on other countries. Well, North Korea doesn't comment about other countries' internal affairs.
Joshua, how many countries do you think are learning from North Korea and the stance that North Korea has taken, and that, hey, it might work for them?
Well, any country that's interested in developing its nuclear program and doing so clandestinely, and should they be uncovered, should it be revealed, can learn lessons from North Korea. There's no exact number as to which countries. The only countries we're dealing with right now on an international level really are Iran and North Korea, and perhaps Syria, though I think with the political upheaval in Syria right now, the main focus is on the human rights situation. But it's definitely a case study for those who want to develop an illegal nuclear program without suffering significant punishment from the West.
Because James, as well, I mean, you get immediate prestige, perceived clout, if you've got a nuclear weapons program.
Oh, indeed, prestige is very important to these regimes that suffer a huge democratic deficit, and they can often use it in a very nationalist manner, that if there's nothing else you can be proud of your country about, then at least you can be proud that the country is strong enough to stand up to all its self-created external enemies, and that it is part of the nuclear club. And one's got to admit that, for example, if I was an Iranian and I was living there at the centre of the energy ellipse that's running from the Caspian right down to the Gulf, and I had 10% of the world's oil reserves, and I looked out around my borders and I saw Russia as a nuclear weapon state to the north, India and Pakistan to the east, Israel, and then of course the Europeans to the west, and I looked from my beach and I saw the US Fifth Fleet armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons in the Gulf, then I would think to myself, as a good Iranian patriot, then boy, you know, my country, it's 2,000 years old, it has an immense history, it's got all these natural resources, we will need to protect ourselves in the future, let's have the same weapons as these guys. So it's a very much a nationalist card in the case of Iran. It's about the only thing that the Ahmadinejad regime is popular for within the country. When it comes to North Korea, then the regime is so isolated, it is creating so many problems for its own people.
And you wonder if you took away the bomb from North Korea, whether it would feature in the news much at all. Joshua, a recent poll revealed that a fourth of Israel's population quite understandably would emigrate if Iran got the bomb. I mean, the power of this kind of program is that you don't even have to have a bomb. As long as people in Israel, for example, know that Iran is developing this, this is enough to frighten them off.
It frightens off. It's certainly a frightening fact, and it's one that resonates throughout the region. And we found in the course of the WikiLeaks that the #1 issue on all Arab governments' agendas was the Iranian nuclear program. It's a great concern. It's a concern to people in Europe, and that's why there's a need to deal with it effectively and to not brush a report like this aside, but to engage it, to explore the evidence, and then to take the appropriate steps to ensure that that such activity doesn't continue.
Well, in March, the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei described the Libyan crisis as a lesson for Iran not to give up its nuclear ambitions. Khamenei believes that had Gaddafi been in possession of nuclear weapons, NATO wouldn't have been reluctant to launch its attack on Libya. He said Gaddafi's concessions to the West over Libya's nuclear program showed Iran was right to continue to reject any curb to its nuclear development, despite sanctions imposed by countries who fear Tehran might be building nuclear arms. He's got a point there, James, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It doesn't please me to say that at all. But if you're in that kind of vulnerable situation, then the strategic logic is to go ahead and acquire for yourself the weapon that the British and the French acquired for themselves, even when under American nuclear security guarantees in the depth of the Cold War. Of course, you go ahead and acquire it. And this, of course, is at the heart of the whole non-proliferation conundrum, that those countries already have it and have had it for many, many decades, namely the UN Security Council Permanent Five, don't want anyone else to have them. And they have their own good reasons for arguing that point. And of course, some other countries have, through their own eyes, also very good reasons for wanting to have those kind of weapons.
Okay, Bjornar,
Libya's...
Sorry, let me just bring in Bjornar very quickly. I mean, Libya's lesson will make it even harder for the US to reach a deal with Iran and North Korea, don't you think?
Well, the United States right now is busy invading a lot of countries, as it seems, or creating the situations for where their influence in the world can be increased. But we've been down this road before. I mean, during the 80s, North Korea joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty over US and international concerns over proliferation. And they agreed the framework in 1994.
Do you think what's happening in Libya and the fact that he's given up his nuclear weapons, and there's a lot of speculation that this has given NATO and the international community the courage to attack Libya, do you think it'll play into the hands of North Korea? So why should we give up our lessons? We might get the same treatment.
First, North Korea doesn't comment on other countries' internal affairs. And the second, I don't think North Korea has anything to gain from whatever is happening.
Okay, Joshua, do you think that the only protection against any American military action at this stage seems to be the possession of nuclear weapons?
Well, no. The primary protection is to cooperate with international regulations, with the international community, and abide by the sanctions passed by the UN Security Council. That's the primary approach to avoiding any type of conflict, is to work within the confines of international law and international standards.
And some sort of holistic approach.
If North Korea, perhaps that's really, if Iran wants to avoid any issue, and no one knows where the military option is on the table with regards to Iran and with regards to North Korea, and I think it's probably a little sensationalist to suggest that an attack is near. But to avoid any escalation of any sorts, both parties must return to the negotiating table and resolve the conflict through negotiations and through abiding by international standards.
Okay, James, very briefly, if you will. I mean, this rather paints a bit of a dismal picture for Obama's vision of a world without nuclear weapons, doesn't it?
Oh, it does indeed, and he was being quite unrealistic, so aspirational that actually it's irresponsible because it's misleading people. The nuclear great powers will not give up their weapons. Other people will look at the example of North Korea and see that you can have the most ghastly regime doing the most terrible things to your own people, but the international system will do nothing about it. If you don't have these weapons, as in Libya, or indeed let's not forget Serbia in 1999, then the international system will take upon itself this so-called responsibility to protect and go ahead and possibly intervene. North Korea, for the time being, is immune from that because of nuclear weapons, and Iran wants to be in that same position.
It certainly seems one step forward, 10 steps back, doesn't it, in nuclear proliferation. Thanks very much to our guests, James Wylie talking last there, Bjornar Simonsen and Joshua Goodman. And of course, as viewers, thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.